Hi. Hello, everyone. Happy Thursday. As we were playing some music, I was flipping through the daily UI, and everyone has been making small tweaks based on the lessons that we've talked about. So I'm really excited to see that things are moving in a good direction. So we'll have, you'll be working on the daily UI for the rest of your curriculum, but we'll really hone in on this for the next 3 weeks. And so my goal is by the end of the 3 weeks that we're going to fix all these little things and be awesome, awesome UI designers. And so looking forward to seeing everyone's progress along the way. That being said, I wanted to make a couple of announcements. So for the daily UI, Kyla had posted a link to a visual design rubric. And it's pinned in the channel, and it will also be posted when Kyla shares the daily UI channel or the UI challenge. But I wanted to take a look at it as a cohort. So when it comes to creating your visuals, and this also goes beyond creating your daily UIs, always refer back to this because these are pieces and things that we've seen in the past that have helped set other students apart in terms of their visual design skills, and is also a really, really great reference point to refer back to these principles as you're working throughout your designs. So some of this, if not most of this, will be discussed in Unit 3, and if we look through each one, I want all of you to strive to get level 3, as in exceptional. And that also goes for the assignments and the sprint projects that you all will be working on. So I know I've been highlighting the level 2, but I believe that everyone is going to be able to meet a level 3. So we'll take a look at this. So some principles to follow: clarity, contrast, and hierarchy. Composition is bold and creative while maintaining clarity, contrast, and hierarchy. So think about yesterday, we talked about text hierarchy and how that was so important, that once somebody lands on their page, they should be able to understand what they're looking at. So something that would not be passing is there's no clear hierarchy in terms of visual or text, and users have a difficult time knowing where to look first. Then we have repetition and consistency. So design system is crafted from scratch to fit the product's unique brand and voice. And in Unit 3, we won't have a lesson dedicated to design systems, but I will see if I can put something together for tomorrow so we can talk more about that. The best way that I've learned design is by imitating and replicating other design systems that are out there, because frankly, it's hard to come up with your own system to create a button that you think will look great or a modal that will work well, and make it cohesive throughout your product experience. So we'll talk a little bit more about this in the next few weeks, but really making sure that there's design consistency. Then space and alignment, something that we'll touch on today, is we talked a lot about alignment over the last couple of days, but making sure that it follows a system, that you're not arbitrarily just placing elements all over each other or all around your design, that everything is intentional. We've talked about color, making sure that's adding value and providing visual emphasis, adding clarity, signaling clickability, and making sure that your colors don't clash or don't weaken the visual hierarchy, and that there's no clear color system. Typography, making sure that you have a type system in place and that it's capturing the brand and tone of the product, and that we're not just picking random text sizes and weights and seeing what sticks and not using every single font choice that's available. And then this last two, graphics and illustrations, making sure that illustrations, photography, and iconography and other media are only used when they have meaning and aligns with the page's goals, tells a story, or drive sign up. And then if you are using illustrations, this I wouldn't focus too much on. There are plenty of websites out there if you're interested in checking out illustrations that you're able to use. So I wouldn't worry too much about becoming a strong illustrator. That's not the goal of Unit 3, but just making sure overall the images that you use, the iconography that you use, feels cohesive and is intentional, and it's just not something randomly that you pulled. And then the last piece is attention to detail, which should be apparent in all of your work, from your assignments to your resume to your portfolio, that it follows the same voice and tone, and that there's no spelling errors, and that everything is really making sure that you've paid attention to all the little things. And so grammar is a really big issue that I've seen in designs where words are misspelled. I've been in meetings in the past where something was misspelt, and that actually changed the entire course of the meeting. No longer were they focused on the goal of the project. They were now trying to find other things that were wrong with your design. So paying attention to grammar, making sure things are spelled correctly is really, really important. All right. Any questions on the daily UI or this rubric that I can answer? Okay, so please take a look at it if you haven't done so already. All right, so moving on to the next announcement is the instruction team works very closely with labs, and one of the things that has been really, really helpful when it comes to cross-collaboration and working with other designers and other developers, not just in Lambda, but outside when you're working as a UX designer, collaboration is going to be really, really important. And we've actually seen a shift over in the different types of design tools that folks are using in the tech industry today. So previously, the last few years, Sketch was a very, very popular tool, and now we're seeing that more and more folks are migrating over to Figma because the collaboration piece is just, there's so much more capabilities with that versus using a tool like Adobe XD and Sketch, who are quite not there yet. So that being said, if you aren't using Figma already, this is a really good opportunity to learn something that's new. And as we all know, the tech industry is constantly changing. In the UX industry, there are different trends that take place, and part of being a UX designer is being comfortable with change and ambiguity. So going forward, the assignments that you'll be working on, they will be required to be in Figma if they're not already. That way it's easier for all of us to go in and be able to capture mistakes early on. And it's easier for me to go into a Figma file than to see a screenshot. The other piece to that too is Labs is requiring all of their students to use Figma. And one of the pain points that we've seen is that people aren't comfortable with the tool or don't quite know how to use it. So we are going to get our practice in here, so that way you will all be rock stars in Figma by the time you get into Labs. So that way that is not holding up your work when you're working on your iterations. And then there was another piece that I was going to mention as well that I just forgot. But yeah, so the transition over to Figma is going to be really important. And so part of that is also making sure that we're stay organized in our design tools. So making sure that everything is clearly organized in Figma. So we'll be paying more attention to that over the next few weeks. And that's just a general good practice to have when you're working as a UX designer. You will have multiple designers going into your file. In interviews, I've had UX managers actually ask me to show them my file to make sure that it was organized. So prepping for that and getting comfortable with it now is going to help you be more successful when you are looking for a job. All right, any questions on anything that I've talked about so far? Okay, awesome. All right, so let's move on, and we are going to talk about Intro to Visual Hierarchy. And when I think about visual design, everything that we'll talk about is going to be very, very important when it comes to creating your own mockups. And a lot of these things that we'll talk about today is also referenced in the rubric that we were looking at earlier. So if something's unclear, if there's examples that you would like to see, feel free to unmute yourself. I want to make sure that that everyone has a strong understanding of these principles, because this is really going to influence the work that you all are putting together. So the goal for today is really just to explain what visual hierarchy is and how it impacts our design. So when it comes to creating an interface, everything that we put in our designs can be prioritized. There's always intention behind every element that we choose to add on a page. And if you think of the last time you were looking at a website or an application, or maybe the last time you picked up a newspaper, what did you notice first? And we don't need to have an answer for this, but at a newspaper, perhaps maybe it was the header. So for example, the examples that we looked at yesterday, we noticed the title of the page. Or maybe when we visited a website, perhaps it was a landing page where we noticed the hero image and a call to action button to sign up. So everything that you're putting on your screen has to be intentional, and it has to be prioritized. Otherwise, we would just get these blobs of content that would appear, and the user wouldn't really quite understand what they need to do as soon as they land on your page. That being said, visual hierarchy is how we design and prioritize components in an interface, and it's how we present the most important information to the user. So it's really easy for anyone to take content and call it an interface, but a visual hierarchy is what makes an interface look designed. Visual hierarchy is going to help us organize the page and present the content, functionality, and overall experience to the user in an intuitive, digestible way. And without visual hierarchy, our interface would look like blobs of content. So if we bring our attention to the example that we have here, we have components that represent strong visual hierarchy. So we'll talk about things like size and white space, but you could see that the most important element is emphasized by its size. As we gradually go down the page, the components get a little bit smaller, and we're able to clearly see what's most important to what is least important. Whereas on the right-hand side, there's a lack of visual hierarchy. When we're looking at this, it looks like blobs of content. There's not really any specific element that really draws our attention because everything is looking very similar and alike. So when it comes to visual hierarchy, we want to focus on the principles that we see on this left-hand side. And we can incorporate these principles of visual hierarchy in our digital products. Our user interfaces need to be able to communicate effectively, and the way that you choose to display your elements on a page will drive your user to a particular action or inaction. So how do we communicate with visual hierarchy? Luke Robleski wrote a fantastic paper on visual hierarchy and UI design titled Communicating with Visual Hierarchy. And in this paper, Luke explains why visual presentation of a web interface is essential. So he basically breaks this down into 3 critical reasons. The first one is informing users. Our interfaces need to make sure that we're guiding our users through our interface seamlessly. We don't ever want to put our users in a spot where once they land on a page that they're confused and they're not quite sure what to do next. For example, we want to make sure the broadest content is at the top of the page, followed by other content in order of importance. The second piece is making sure that we're communicating content relationships, meaning we should present content within the interface in a way that matches our users' expectations. So always thinking back in context of the user, designing interfaces that meet their expectations, not placing in random elements just because we feel like it should be there, but it should be really matching back to what they're expecting. And that also ties into more of the research piece that you do earlier on, understanding what their goals are. And then the third piece is creating emotional impact. So we often visit places and do things for more than what they offer at face value. And for example, we visit a coffee shop for more than just coffee. Maybe we go there for the ambiance, to listen to the music. Maybe we're there for the people. Perhaps we're there just for the overall atmosphere that the coffee shop provides. So websites should be treated in that similar fashion, where we also want to create a positive emotional impact on our users. And that goes along with these two bullet points that we just reviewed, making sure that we're able to guide our users and that we're communicating our content relationships. And this also focuses a lot on the visual hierarchy principles that we'll be reviewing. If a person lands on your page and they don't know what to do, or maybe it seems cluttered or overwhelming, they will leave your site and find another site that will be able to solve their problem. So within those first few seconds, it's really critical that we are setting up our mock-ups in a way where they're able to find what they need easily. And then the way that we design visual hierarchy is, if we think back to this newspaper analogy, we need to identify the content that we'd like to include on the page and then prioritize it. So just like how a newspaper is set up, the most important item is going to live front and center. And then as we continue to read, we see that other sections are less likely to be emphasized, shown by how the information is presented. So if we think back to the image that we were looking at yesterday of the Wisconsin State Journal, we see that sections are broken up. We have the headers, we have the subtitles, and the paragraphs, all broken down by different levels. And the same logic applies when it comes to designing digital user interfaces. We can utilize these visual hierarchy principles to identify the content and then prioritize it based on our user, business, and product needs. So designing for visual hierarchy may seem really confusing at first. So unless you've really gone in and have designed a lot, it can be a little confusing as to where to start. So the first piece is making sure that we're identifying and prioritizing the content, and that can be easily done in a Google Doc. And once we've prioritized our content, then we're ready to design our visual hierarchy. So the principles that we'll be reviewing for visual hierarchy, they are going to be size, contrast, white space, proximity, symmetry, rule of thirds, rule of odds, implied movement, this concept of below the fold, and eye tracking, as well as alignment. So we'll dive into each one in more detail. What questions do we have about designing for a visual hierarchy? Okay, great.
I actually had a question. So,
sure.
When you're prioritizing like content, does it have to be all user, business, and product needs?
It has to be a balance between all of them.
All of them at the same time? Okay.
Yeah.
And you were saying?
No, sorry, go on.
So like you can't just design anything just based on the user or product needs. Like, it has to be all three.
Yeah, it definitely has to be a balance of all three. So, I mean, we should always strive to make our experiences solve our users' needs, but our business, they're also going to have needs too, because in the end, they're looking to make money. So we have to make sure that there's a balance between all three. So there's going to be a lot of prioritization that you'll have to do when you're working with other designers, especially product managers, other folks that have a stake in the product. And so there might be some features that you may have to sacrifice, maybe for the first few months, and that you'll be able to gradually build upon, just to make sure all those other pieces are met, these business and product needs.
Okay, so it's like based on requirements almost, right?
Yeah, you'll have a requirement. Hopefully you'll have a product
Brief.
brief that you're able to refer to.
Hmm. Okay, I get it.
Cool.
Thanks.
No problem. So yes, it's when it comes, I think one of the things with UX design is it's not only about solving problems by creating these user interfaces, but on a daily basis, you have to collaborate and communicate with other stakeholders. It's not this environment where you're working at a desk by yourself for the entire day. The way that my organization was set up was I was in meetings all day because I was working across so many different products that all had different requirements and working closely with all these different product managers who had their own needs and working closely with executives because they also had their own initiatives. So it really comes down to balancing out between all of these and being able to articulate, and collaborate with other folks. So that's why towards the end of this unit, we'll focus on team collaboration and stakeholder presentations. Cool. Other questions that I can answer? Okay. Let's move on to the first principle. And the first one is size. So size is going to be a way to let people know what you want them to look at first. So typically, the larger something is, the more importance it has. And generally speaking, the largest thing on the page, like I said, gets looked at first. So in this example on the right-hand side, we see that the rectangles we see that giant rectangle on the top is drawing our attention, whereas the bottom components don't draw our attention as much. And even if you're looking at this for the first time, your eyes might also be seeing the same thing, where you see the largest element, and then as you start to scan towards the bottom, you're noticing the bottom portions a little less. And typically in interfaces, when we think about using photos, they also tend to draw the eye more than other elements on a page. So if you have text and photos that are roughly at the same size, the photo will most likely get the first glance, but an extremely large headline will get glanced at before a relatively smaller photo. What questions do we have about size? Okay. So one of the things that I do see with design is that because we know that size draws our attention, sometimes I find that people will try to overemphasize the size, and maybe they might make a button much bigger in comparison to other buttons, or maybe they'll make the text super large. And yes, that will draw attention, but that is going to break the cohesiveness of what you're creating. So there's a fine balance between size and making sure that you're intentionally guiding the user to what they want to see. So just because size is important does not mean we need to make everything big. Again, we need to be very intentional with our design. This next one is really important. So along with size, we have white space, and that is going to be one way to use spacing. White space is not always literally white. It's going to refer to the negative space around an object. So like we see here, we have a lot of negative space between all of these three components on the bottom. And so if we're looking at this again for the first time, we would actually see those elements first just because there's more spacing that's around it. So that is attracting our attention versus the other two elements that are very similar to one another. So generally speaking, the more white space around an object, the more attention it receives and the more important it seems, even if it's small, like we see here. Now, one thing that I see constantly is that it's really, really easy to want to maximize every piece of real estate on your screen, feeling like we need to fill up everything that's that's on our artboard. But in order to make things readable, we need to give elements breathing space. So white space is going to be really important when it comes to creating your mock-ups, because what happens is the less white space we have, the more overwhelmed that user could feel once they land on your page. What questions do we have about white space?
I had a question about this example. So the idea here is that the smaller 3 pieces at the bottom are grabbing your attention more than the top 2?
Yes. So if we look at the amount of spacing around the smaller pieces of elements, that is going to be greater than the spacing between the first 2 rectangles. So the idea is it would bring, that would create, focus more attention on those smaller pieces on the bottom.
Okay, thanks.
Sure. Other questions on white space?
So like, I know that size draws the eye, right? Like, how do you prioritize like the white space and the size of like each element? Like for this box, you know how it's supposed to draw the user to what's important, and then there's elements that's smaller that can, you know, provide contrast. Do you know like how that ties in together?
Yeah. So, oh, go on.
No, go ahead, because it's like interesting to me.
Yeah. So I would say that it is all going to be based on what your content is. So a good example is a landing page that we'll work on together, and perhaps maybe it's a marketing landing page and someone's interested in, let's just pretend it's like a fitness website. We would probably use size to draw the user into the hero image to provide a UVP, a unique value proposition. And so that might be an area where we focus on size. And then gradually as they go towards the bottom of the page and they learn more about it, then maybe we would focus more on white space, just because the elements are smaller and we deem those pieces of information less important than the overall header.
Oh, okay, that makes a lot of sense, actually. That was a good explanation. Thank you.
Cool. Yeah, you got it. Other questions on white space? Okay. All right, this next principle is contrast. And contrast is a tool that you can use to make one object stick out compared to another. More than just color, contrast is speaking about tonality and vibrancy. And without contrast, our eyes would move around the page without having anything to really fall on. So like we see in this example, the white rectangles, the dark rectangles offer the greatest contrast in contrast to the rectangles that are white. And so we're able to see the difference between these two. And if we're looking at this, and especially if we're doing the squint test, we see that the items that have this dark gray background appears more important because it stands out in comparison to the other elements on the page, therefore making it seem more important to the user. A good example of this, and we'll work through this in our guided project, is if we think about, thinking back to our hero image of this fitness website, sometimes we see a sign in and sign up option. We might want to present contrast. So for example, the sign up would maybe be something that is more important just because we're trying to, let's say, grow our revenue base or customer revenue. And whereas the sign in might might be a little less of a priority, and so we would see a contrast between those two. What questions do we have about contrast? Now, this next one should look familiar because we talked about it as one of the Gestalt principles, but here it is again, and it's this idea of proximity. Another way that we can use spacing is working with proximity. And by using proximity, we can help group related information and imagery together. This helps call attention and lend importance to the elements that might otherwise seem unimportant. And for example, let's say we have a headline and a large image that are next to each other. Then due to proximity, because they're close to one another, users will think that they go together. So by nestling a headline next to the large image, the headline might still be relatively small, but we understand its role and importance by its proximity to the image. By using proximity, we're also guiding the eye around the page. And we can see in this example, these boxed elements appear related to one another due to its proximity. So think of proximity also used in navigation bars. If we had a navigation bar where our logo was all the way on the left-hand side, we had a sign-in in the middle of the navigation bar, and maybe we had log out all the way at the end, we would be actually going against this idea of proximity. And somebody that's looking at it for the first time may say, well, are these really related? Why are they so spread out? So that's one example as to how we can use proximity. Another, thinking back to Monday's lesson, when we were creating the sign-up form, we placed the title next to the input field. So we had full name input field, and so we kept those close to one another because we wanted to let the user know that that field related to entering in their full name. Now, if we had spread it out, then there would be confusion, and users would think that they would not be related to one another. What questions do we have about proximity? All right, so this next one here is symmetry. And many early entry-level designers tend to design with symmetry automatically. And they do so by making sure that everything is center aligned, the same size, evenly spaced. So you would see something like this on the right-hand side. Symmetry is not bad at all, but it can be a little less engaging in compositions. So there's certainly a place for symmetry in design, and you should always keep this as part of your toolkit. It also helps create stability, but it's harder to use in interaction design because it makes the path through a page more difficult to find and follow. So if we were to look at the differences between this page where there's less symmetry versus this page, your eyes would be easier to follow this particular mock-up versus this one where things are symmetrical to one another, so you're not likely to know where to view or how to scan the page. Your eyes kind of just go all over the place. So what questions do we have about symmetry? All right, next we have our rule of thirds. And the rule of thirds is used to add interest to a composition and is simple to remember and powerful in its use. The rule of thirds just means that if you were to divide your page or screen by 2 vertical, evenly spaced lines and 2 horizontal, evenly spaced lines, you would place your element of focus at the point of intersection of 2 of the lines. So like we see here on the right-hand side, where that intersection occurs, we see that there is a green rectangle on the top and also on the bottom. This is just a very solid, useful guideline that can quickly turn a stale layout into an interesting one. And you may have heard of the rule of thirds already because it's frequently used in photography and art composition, and it can be used very effectively in digital composition as well. What questions do we have about the rule of thirds?
I've got a quick one. Um, so do you know if there's any way to like build a quick thirds grid on Figma?
No, not that I know of. What I
Okay.
actually do, all right, let's, we're in Intro to Visual Hierarchy. Let's start a new file and let's just do examples. I mean, what I've done is once I've created an artboard, and let's just call this rule of thirds, I would go in and just add my rulers. So this width is 375. Tip, if you do Command Spacebar, if you are on a Mac, you could actually do math here. So 375 divided by 3, 125. And so I would go in and I would actually split it up using these guidelines.
Okay.
And once you do that, this might be a quicker way for me to do this.
Can you say the command for the ruler for everybody?
Oh yeah, totally. Shift R. Shift R will allow for it to appear, and then you can also remove it so that you can take a look at your design. And you're just going to drag this guy over.
Awesome.
And then I would do the same. I would just drag this down over. So whatever the equal parts are, I would just drag it over and just continue to build it out. And that way you'll have lines that you can refer to add your content in within the intersection.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
Sure.
So Melissa, would you have this sitting on the side and then you design your page next to it, or would you put the grid first and then you design on top of it?
Yeah, definitely design this out first, and then I would put the content on top of it.
Okay, cool.
And we're going to talk about grids and columns on Monday when we dive into intro into design aesthetics. And so we'll work through an exercise on that. And then as part of your assignment, you will be able to apply a layout to your designs to make sure that everything's aligned. Cool. Other questions on rule of thirds? And just as a reminder, keyboard shortcuts are available in Figma, so it's always helpful to have this up. So I will refer back to this so that way I can learn my shortcuts. All right, so moving on. All right, so we have the rule of odds, and this is going to tell us that humans actually tend to respond better to odd numbers of elements as opposed to even ones. This is related to symmetry in that even numbers being divisible by 2 are a little more boring than odd numbers. And having an odd number of elements engage the mind a little bit more in comparison to using an even number of elements. So using odd numbers of elements on the page can help add interest to your layout. And the example here is we have an odd number on the top, which is going to feel stronger in comparison to the elements on the bottom of the page, where there's only 2. So that doesn't feel as strongly in comparison to the top portion of that page. What questions do we have about the rule of odds?
What if it's like a page of, just like you're looking at the whole page and then you have odd number of elements and then they're kind of cohesive. Like for example, what we have right now, they are, it's an odd number and it looks cohesive. Does that still apply?
So what if they had both? Is that what you're asking?
Yeah, so yeah. You have both even and odd groupings within this one example, and the one example itself as a whole looks pretty cohesive because it is an odd number.
Yeah, That's a great question. So you can use both. There's no rule to say that you have to use odd numbers or that you have to use even numbers. As you can see in this example, it works well having both even and odd, and that is okay in your design. When you're creating your designs, you're always going to be exploring. What you're asking is totally okay to mix.
Okay.
Other questions on the rule of odds? Okay. Okay, so this next one, implied movement. An implied movement helps keep a user engaged. So if I think back to the example that we were looking at in our in-class challenge when we were working on the text hierarchy, we were specifically looking at Joshua's page. And so let me see if I can pull that up just so we can take a look at it again. Here we go. All right. So I'm going to just leave that there. But if we take a look at the original design, and why can't I see the layers? Oh, because I'm hiding it. All right, so I'm just going to name this as example. I'm going to name this B2. All right, so if we take a look at this, and if I were to hide this, and see, this is a good example as to why I should have clearly labeled these, because this is going to be confusing. But applied movement, the way that it's structured here is our eyes were kind of just going from here to all the way to the right, to the left, all the way to the right. And there is a lot of control and influence that that we have as to where we want our users to view content as they're going throughout the page. And so there's something called saccades. Saccades are actually small movements of the eyes while reading. And saccades happen whenever we're looking at anything, and basically they are our eyes taking in all the things, and it becomes a shorthand for us to understand. So we need to be very intentional with implied movement. And so laying out our page with implied movement is going to help guide the saccades to the next item of interest that will carry the narrative of our pages forward. So in Josh's example, the saccades, or my saccades, were basically going from place to place. So we need to create intentional implied movement by creating diagonal relationships between the elements of our page, or by incorporating actual imagery of implied movement. Or it could be as simple as we left aligned everything, which made it easier for my eyes to scan from the top to the bottom. What we want to avoid is having the user bounce back and forth. That is going to take a mental load on them as well, and it could overwhelm them as you're scanning your information. So we need to also think about implied movement when it comes to creating our mockups. All right, thanks Josh for letting me use your example again. What questions do we have about implied movement? All right, so the next one here is below the fold, which I think many of us are familiar with. And this is a term that actually emerged from the newspapers and has caught hold in web and mobile context. So when you think of newspapers, you basically had the top half of the page to grab people's attention. And when it came to designing a newspaper, you had the whole page open on the screen, but you had to be aware of where that page would end up being folded. That way you didn't bury your most compelling headlines where no one could see them. And this is important in especially in mobile design, oftentimes I see that someone has taken up probably half of the page with content that was probably unnecessary and may not have been relevant to the user. And so at that point, there could have been more important information that we could have prioritized upfront. So when you're designing, especially in context of your mobile screens, always think about, what is not going to be visible to that user and what is going to be visible. So what questions do we have about below the fold?
Does that apply to scrolling? Like
Yeah.
scrolling? Okay.
Yes, definitely applies to scrolling. What I also, as a helpful tip, is there is a mirror application that's available on Figma. I think it might be called Figma Mirror. I have to look at it. But what I always recommend to folks is when you're designing, always, especially in mobile, always look at it on your phone. That is going to help you understand where things may be below the fold, perhaps buttons may not be big enough, perhaps there's not enough contrast. And I would be happy to show you all what that tool looks like and share a link with you at the end of this lesson. But being able to see what you're actually designing by holding a device is going to be really, really helpful in being able to catch little mistakes and being able to discover what is going to be immediately visible. Okay, so this next one is my favorite because I think at some point in our design career, we may not have really used alignment to our best ability. So alignment's going to create structure for our user interfaces. If we take a look at the left-hand example, the aligned elements create an invisible white column on the left-hand side. This guides the saccade smoothly from the top of the page to the bottom. So this also ties in very closely to implied movement. If we look at the example on the right-hand side, the elements are out of order, and our saccades would follow the direction of the white arrows, moving them back and forth without focusing on one particular element. Now, let's actually look at a real-world example of alignment, and this is an image from a polling ballot. So you may be familiar with this, but back in November 8th of 2000, there was actually uncertainty on whether Al Gore or George W. Bush had won. And after close scrutiny, part of the problem arose from this poor ballot design. Some voters believe that the second hole aligned with Al Gore, which you see on the left-hand side, but it actually corresponded with Pat Buchanan, which you see on the right. So as a result, Buchanan of Palm Beach received double the votes. Now, if the buttons had been aligned correctly, perhaps they would have had a more accurate count. And so I tell you the story because without paying attention to alignment, your elements, your mock-ups are going to look disorderly. They're going to look chaotic. So we have to make sure that we're creating elements into rows and columns so that we can enhance the aesthetics of our designs. What questions do we have about alignment? All right. So this last principle that we'll touch on is eye tracking. And you may have seen this out here. There's actually eye tracking technology that determines what users are looking at when they arrive on a page. And actually, if I flip over eye tracking, let's do heat maps. We're actually able to pull what people are seeing. So in these examples here, these are all heat maps of where users are paying of where they're looking at. So the red is going to be the information that most users are looking at, and then gradually goes from yellow to green. So this is really interesting. Fortunately, we won't have access to something like this, but what we've learned from these eye tracking tools is that there's a common pattern that people follow in regards to where their eyes go when they're looking at a design. And this is typically either, you know, a Z pattern or this F pattern. This is going to be really important for our visual hierarchies because this is going to show us where our user's attention is most likely going to fall on this page. And our designs also directly influence which pattern our users will follow. So if we were to present our content as a blog post or as items in a list, then our users will typically follow an F pattern. And so when we're designing content-heavy pages, we should keep this in mind so we can place the most important information where our user will see them. And then in a less text-heavy interface, users tend to use the Z pattern more in order to scan the information and make sure they didn't miss anything. So this pattern is useful for highlighting a logo, a CTA, which is also known as a call to action, and graphical content. Also keep in mind, users will tend to scan screens based on their previous experiences. What questions do we have about eye tracking? All right. So before we move into our in-class challenge, any principles that I can go over again, anything that was unclear? This is a really, really important lesson, and this is going to help build your foundation in visual hierarchy or visual design in general. So what else can I review that may have been unclear?
I had a quick question about eye tracking.
Mm-hmm.
So when you're looking at a larger screen, the Z patterns or the F patterns, do they form after they've sort of looked at the center, or is that how they view it in the first place? Like that's like, do you go to the corners? I would imagine that you focus on the center first.
Yeah, so an example could be, let's do Amazon. They could. So I could see what you're saying, Nabia, when you're landing on the page that you see this information first. But then what would gradually happen is they might, if they're looking at this for the first time, start to see, try to find what they're looking for. So they'll start looking in the top corner, they'll scan across, then they'll gradually go down and then go towards the right-hand side. Does that help answer your question?
Yes, so then the center, like if the screen is the most important, then is it?
It depends how you have your screen set up. So it depends on what you're highlighting.
Yes.
So like here, my eyes are kind of all over the place just because it's, I don't know why it's trying to sell me manga. That's really odd. But but it's showing all of this, and then I'm kind of just going through and scanning. Whereas, what is a good example? Let's try. Maybe Dropbox, where I am landing here for the first time, and I've kind of just start scanning. So maybe I'll start looking for items on the top, then I move towards the bottom, and then towards the right-hand side, I see that there's a sign up. But it's all going to be dependent on how, like, what you're prioritizing, how you're using size, in terms of where people are viewing.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. Other questions?
Is it enough to use just one of the principles, or do you need to merge like quite a few? Because I think we have 11, and just trying to fit everything in, or I don't know. Where do you start?
That is a great question, Nora. So you don't have to use everything. I will call out the ones that are most important, which is also highlighted in your visual hierarchy rubric. So when it comes to all of these principles, just thinking overall visual hierarchy, but size is going to be really important. White space, I would say, is going to be the most important, along with alignment. That is something that I've seen in weaker designs where white space and alignment isn't leveraged as much as it should be. So white space, alignment, contrast is also going to be really important, because that will happen whether you're designing out what the text is going to look like or whether you're working on buttons. Proximity as well, because there is going to be a lot of proximity in designs that we see today. So we have a sign up or a sign in. Proximity is also used with these two buttons because they're near one another. This agree to terms. Where I would focus less on and not worry too much about, and you're free to explore it, is symmetry, rule of thirds, rule of odds. We're going to be talking about how to use grids next week, so I'm not worried about this. Implied movement is going to be really important. Below the fold is something that you should just be constantly taking into consideration, and alignment. So that is my summary of that, but I would also refer back to these guidelines that pull out some of these visual principles. These are going to be really, really important to pay attention to as you're building out your mockups. Does that answer your question?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Sure. Yeah, thank you for asking that. Yeah, I don't want someone to feel like, oh, I have to incorporate rule of odds and rule of thirds. No, facing alignment, I mean, that's a really big opportunity. Cool. Other questions that I can answer? Okay, so we're going to take our break, but when you come back from break, we will work on our anchor challenge and see what we can improve based on these visual hierarchy principles. So just make sure you have that all set. And I will place the timer for 5 minutes. So get something to drink, refresh. I'll see you back then. Okay, welcome back, everyone. So for the next 5 minutes, let's work on an in-class challenge. And you are going to review your Anchor Cinema project, and based on what you have, think about what you would change, keeping the visual hierarchy principles in mind. What questions do we have about the assignment or the in-class challenge? Okay. All right, so I'm uploading this in Slack so that you all have it. And I will play some music and set the timer for 5 minutes.
You're on mute.
Thank you, Vivian. So we just finished up our challenge. Who would like to showcase what they worked on?
I didn't actually change anything on my the wire or the prototype that I did, but I just like reviewed what I would change. I could share that and tell you like, okay.
That would be wonderful.
Let me share. You want me to share my screen?
Yeah, let me stop sharing. There you go.
Let me make sure I click the right share screen this time. Let me. All right, is that everybody?
Wonderful. Yeah.
This what looks like complete garbage to me now that I thought was so cool when I first did it. The first thing that stands out to me is these elements here. The proportion. I have this back to school area here really big, and what's really important in my app, my app is all about movies, so I feel like the proportion of this to this is just really off. This should be a lot bigger and bring attention to it, whereas this should be, I feel like, smaller, and I forget the terms that I had in my head to use from the lesson, but just the proportion is off, if that makes sense. And then this area here, this clickable text, it really just breaks up the alignment. I feel like of the entire app. I leave all of this space here. This text is humongous. This alignment is off, and it's just a very just the alignment in itself is just very sloppy and very jumpy, and the proportion is off, and all of that could be cleaned up using the visual hierarchy. I'm losing my words today, but using the lesson that we learned today, using all of those different elements that we could bring into the design. Here, Anchor Cinema, why is that smaller than this gigantic click to join? And I mean, the alignment is just terrible throughout, I feel like. But yeah, that's basically it. I wish I would have been able to say it out loud the way I said it in my head, because it was phenomenal. But this is what you guys are getting.
This is great. Let's leave the screen up for a little bit. So you touched on a lot of things that I agree with you as well. So alignment, for example, like movies is indented. So opportunity alignment, I also see when it just comes to overall, just thinking about like cohesiveness, there are different types of typefaces that you're using. So, I noticed typeface in the status bar and the Anchor Cinema, click to join, movies. So maybe just sticking with one. And then I also would say the like you mentioned, the click to join Anchor Media Cinema. I think we could actually just dramatically improve this if we were just to remove that. Maybe instead of having click to join as a big text, I like how you're using the buttons on the bottom, and maybe we can emphasize that somewhere.
Absolutely. I agree
Cool.
with that.
Great. Awesome. Thank you, Vivian. Appreciate it.
I'm sorry. I'm trying to stop sharing. Oh, don't look back there. I don't know what's on my screen. No.
Oh, you're good. Cool. Thank you. I think we have time for one more. Would anyone else like to show their in-class challenge?
I could go. So funny enough, I was not able to find my Anchor prototype, so I ended up just applying these things to the daily UI. Is that all right?
That's totally cool. As long as you're applying the principles. Yep.
Sounds good. Well, yeah, let me just share my screen here. And so I have them side by side on the things that I kind of changed. So on the left is the updated, on the right is the older one. So I updated a couple things. One, I remember you mentioning the Z tracking, and I thought about how this had less text and it was more shapes. And so I thought maybe that I would like to find the most important information on the top right moving down to the left. So I kind of flipped it. I don't know if that was a good call, but I figured that could be an interesting thing to implement. And then because this is not even functional, it's just a screenshot, I liked the odd number concept, and so I just got rid of the settings menu and threw 3 together down at the bottom just to make it a little bit more visually appealing. And then, and I went through, I updated the fonts so they fit, or sorry, the typefaces. No, this is actually font this time. So they fit the typographic scale. And then, what was the other thing I did?
The toggle button looks different.
Yeah, and I added a little contrast right there as well. And then, and then I centered everything so it fits within those rule of thirds kind of. But yeah, so that's kind of what I did.
Awesome. So let's stay on this page for a bit. So thanks for walking me through. So yes, once you update it with the scale, it looks good. I would say that for how you arrange the top section, whether I think either or could have worked. I think either or would have worked. I do like the way that the first one is set up, your iteration, just because you've adjusted for the sizing of the font. The toggle button is great because when I was looking at the original iteration, it was hard for me to that stay looked like it was floating by itself. So using an existing toggle feature that I think is very similar to iOS or Android, that also aligned with my mental model. And then it's great that you centered everything. So you actually increased the amount of spacing between the toggle buttons and the rest of the rectangular sections. And I would say that in terms of the highlighting odd number of elements, I think what's happening in your second iteration is that because there's so much space in between the home button, the camera, and the profile, it almost seems like they're not related to one another. So think of that principle of proximity, and I would actually bring them closer. And so that way there's more spacing on the margins, and they're brought in closer to one another, so you don't have all the extra space between the icons.
Gotcha. That makes a lot of sense. Okay.
Cool. Awesome. Yeah. Thank you for sharing. Keep working on it. I love seeing iterations in the daily UI. I actually think that working off of something that you've worked on in the past and showing improvement goes a really long way. So don't feel like you have to, for all of you, don't feel like you have to complete that particular challenge for the day. You are welcome to work on something else that you've created in the past. All right. Thank you, Josh.
Thanks.
Cool. All right. So we are going to move on to our guided project. And you should all have access to Figma, and it's under Intro to Visual Hierarchy, and we can just go into the guided project. You can go ahead and just add in your own page. Okay, so what we'll be doing is we are going to, let me share this with you all. We are going to create a landing page for our Flutter website. And I don't think you all have had a chance to create a desktop version before. I think most of the lessons in the past have been focused on mobile. And what we'll do is to begin, all right, cool, I'm set up here. We're just going to create a landing page in wireframe format. We're not going to worry about color today. And we can continue to use the typographic scale that we worked off of yesterday, this Hebo. And so I'm going to paste this in. And all right. So it doesn't look like my text styles are set up. Okay. So we'll have to fix that. That's okay. All right, yeah, so you can feel free, go ahead and copy this, or you could just use what you have yesterday. And what we're going to do is we're going to create a desktop artboard. So just tap A. You're going to go into desktop, and there's an artboard just for desktop that's set for 1440 by 1024. And you can just click on that. And we are going to pay attention to our layers and our artboards, and we'll go ahead and we're going to rename this as Flutter landing page. And then based on what we touched on earlier about prior to actually mocking something up, it's all about making sure that we understand what's going to be on this page, and we also are going to prioritize what is going to live here. So what are some things that could live on the Flutter landing page? And you can just feel free to mute yourself. What are some things that you would see on a landing page?
Welcome.
Did you say welcome?
Yeah.
Awesome. Okay, welcome. What else?
Login.
Login. What else?
I think maybe screenshots of what's inside or in reviews and such.
Yeah, so maybe images of other services or services.
A call to action button, whatever that.
Yep, you got it. Call to action, a CTA. What else also appears on the landing page?
Sign up.
Sign up. Great. And then a few more that we'll add in is our navigation. We need our hero section, which could also be like our welcome. And then we need a UVP. We think back to our unique value proposition. Okay. So, given a real life scenario, you would actually work through with your designers, with the business to figure out what would need to be, what is absolutely necessary for the landing page. So if I were to prioritize this, given the time that we have to put together this landing page, I would reprioritize it as definitely need a navigation. We'll need a hero image or a hero section because this is focused on the Flutter landing page. Then we'll also have we could also add in other services as well. All right, so we'll focus on these three. Any questions so far? And the navigation will have sign, login, sign up. So they'll contain the CTAs.
What do you mean by a hero section?
Yeah, so a hero section could be, so the way that a landing page is normally set up is it is trying to obviously to promote your products and services, but this would be an example of a landing page, and this would be what a hero section would look like. And so it's typically the largest, it's typically really large in size. It focuses on a call to action, asking the user to do something that they're really focused on. So right now, their primary goal is to get folks to drive with Uber. So this would be an example of a hero page. Some imagery, a unique value proposition. So drive with Uber, earn at least 1,600 in New Jersey, and then a call to action. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, thank you.
Sure. Other questions so far? Okay. All right, so moving on. We're going to focus on a lot of these principles that we talked about. So we might not get to all of them, which is okay. So that was a question that was asked earlier. Melissa, do I need to focus on every single principle that we talked about? No, you do not need to. There are a few that you must pay attention to, but we will not be going through all of this. So we'll talk a lot about these other principles that will come in handy. Let's see. All right, so now that we've prioritized our content, we can begin to organize it into a visual hierarchy according to these principles that we've reviewed. And if we didn't take into consideration visual hierarchy, we probably have something that would be really plain, like in an HTML format like this. So this is not going to be helpful to any user. What we want to do is make sure that things are clearly outlined so that once a user arrives on their page, they know what step they need to take. So the first is we can focus on building out our navigation and really understand this idea of proximity. So I'm going to create a navigation by clicking the letter R, and I'm going to drag that across, and I'm going to set the height of that to 90. This will vary, but for now, 90 is a pretty good size. And I am going to just adjust my fill. This is just my own personal taste. I want to use something a little bit darker for my wireframes. So I'm just using one of the UX7 colors, the first dark gray. So here we have our header. Now, I want to pay attention to alignment along the way. And another thing that I could also do is add smart guides. So if we go back and click on Shift R, we're going to have this ruler appear. And we can drag in, let's work with a margin of about 60. So you can just drag this guy over until it hits 60. And you might just need to zoom in a little bit just to be able to get right to 60. And then if we do, I'm just using my Mac, so Command Space 1440 minus 60, that's going to bring us to 1380. So I'm just going to drag this guy back out over here and set it to 1380. So I just have these clean margins. All right. So we'll continue to work off of this navigation. Typically in a landing page, you would have a logo that would live on the top left-hand corner, and then you would have links that would appear on the right-hand side or throughout the navigation. So something similar to Uber, they have their logo, they have their links that are available, and then you can also see they work with really big margins as well, which has helped create more of a cleaner design. And to start, we can add in our logo. And so taking a look at what we have available in our type scale, we can start with 30. And because I have not added this as a text scale yet, I'll just show you what that looks like again. So make sure you have that selected. You're going to tap on the plus button, and I'm going to create H5 Bebo. You should already have this, but I'm just adding it in because I did not have this here. And I could go in and just start typing in the logo. So it's Flutter. Make sure it's an H5. I'm going to adjust the fill so that there's enough contrast so that I'm able to see it, even though these are just wireframes. And I'm going to make sure that this is also centered. Making sure that there's enough spacing between the bottom of this and the top of this. So right now, if I were to select Flutter and hold down Option and highlight over this, you may notice that it's already telling you how many pixels it is from the top, which is 38, and how many pixels from the bottom, which is 8. So key is making that centered. So you can either adjust it manually, or you could just continue. You can just use these items on the top here, where if you were to hold down your nav bar and the logo, and if you were to click on this little drop-down menu, distribute vertical spacing, hopefully that should have adjusted it, which does not look like it did. Am I using the right one? All right. All right, so let me just go ahead and center this. All right. And then because we have our margins, we want to make sure that there's alignment. So I'm just going to drag this across so that it's touching against this margin here. And now we have our logo. Now for the rest of the navigation, we talked about having a sign in as well and log in. So I noticed with the product brief that the Flutter is actually an application and and it's also a messaging app that you can use on desktop. So what I'll do is I'll make those options available. So I will have sign in, and you can just drag that across. And right now we have it set to each 5. Maybe I want to use something a little bit smaller because right now this is carrying the same visual weight. So if I take a look at my text, my typographic scale, we used in each 5 a 30, maybe we could use an each 6. So let me just go ahead and add that in so I don't have to manually change it. All right, so I'll click on this guy, change it to an H6, and now I have my sign in. And then I'll also create a download because it is an application. So using this rule of proximity, if I were to space everything out like this, it may not look like it's related to one another. It may not even look like a navigation bar. So using the principle of proximity and alignment, with alignment, I'll just make sure that the download is right against the margin that's set here with my ruler for my smart grids. And then I will take the sign in, and I'm just holding down shift as I'm moving it towards the right because it will move it in increments, I believe, of 10. I'm going to use the principle of proximity to make sure that they're close to one another. So I will leave it as, we can just set it for 30 pixels in between for now. And then we need to make sure that all of this is centered. So if I'm looking at this, again, if I hold down Option, I'm 23 pixels from the top, 32 from the bottom. Also, there's a big discrepancy between sign in and Flutter. It's not aligned, it's not centered. So I would just highlight all of these, align vertical centers, and just triple check that it's centered here. And so we have our navigation bar. What questions do we have about setting up the navigation bars or using the principle of proximity and spacing? Okay. And feel free to come in here and grab things if I'm going a little too fast, or just stop me and just unmute yourself. Okay, so the next thing that we're going to work on is this hero section. So using Uber as an example, here is our hero section. We have our UVP, and we have an image, and we have a call to action. So we're going to create something very, very similar to this. And what we'll do is we're going to create, have a UVP, And these are things that I had pulled from the original product brief that you can just copy and paste. But as part of our UVP, Flutter messaging is all about staying connected regardless of platform. It's also a cloud-based mobile and desktop messaging app. They focus on speed, security, and social features. So we'll talk about what that could look like. So I'm going to use size for UVP because that is where I want my user to draw their attention once they arrive on the page. So maybe my UVP looks like that. Stay connected regardless of platform. And right now it's set to an H6, which seems a little small. It's not really drawing my attention. So if we take a look at our type scale, let's try 60. Let's try an H2 and see what that looks like. So I'm going to add that as part of my text scale, H2. Wonderful. And I'm going to go and change this to an H6. And it is not changing over. Oh, I know what I did wrong. All right. So let us edit this. So for those of you that are wondering how I went ahead and edit this, once you have your text style selected and you click on this H6-Hibo and you go into this little settings here, you can edit style. So right now I have it set to 24, even though the H6 is supposed to be 60. So I'm going to change. Oh,
sorry, H2 is the correct one you wanted to go for.
H2, yes, thank you. H2, awesome. Yes, thank you for that. Yeah, so we'll now have our H2 that we fixed. I may go ahead and create a bolder version, but for now I'll just hit Command B to make it bold. And
you also just changed the sign in and download buttons.
Oh,
because
dear.
you changed the H6 that was already set correctly.
Thank you for calling that out.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Let us do this. So, all right, we're going to do an we're going to fix this. I'm going to detach these for now, and then I'll fix this up in the file. But we had, let's see, we had this as our H6s. Okay. All right, I will fix that. Okay, all right, cool. Oh dear. Okay, so here we have the start of our UVP. Stay connected regardless of platform. And then we might want to add some additional body text. So maybe that could, if we refer back to our type scale, we have our body text is 18. So we'll go ahead and add that. And labor body, Hibo. Drag this over. Change it over to body Hibo. Okay, cool. So that is working. That seems really, really small. There's a really, really big difference between the two. Yes, this is standing out more, but I think there's an opportunity to make this a little bit bigger. So right now our body text is set to 18. What if we went ahead and changed it to, here we go, our H6, which is 24. So we'll create an H6. Okay. And then change this guy over to H6. What am I doing? And so we can change this to Flutter Messenger is a cloud-based mobile and desktop messaging app with a focus on speed, security, and social features. And so this could be our MVP, our UVP. And we'll place this a little close to one another just because they are related. So I have it set 30 pixels, and I'll leave this alone, but I feel like there's a lot of spacing in between these two, but we'll leave that alone for now. All right, so now that we have our UVP, we've also talked about adding in, as part of our hero section, a call to action. So for call to action, we're going to create 2 buttons just to illustrate this concept of contrast. And because this is a landing page, it's a marketing page, and I would assume that we want folks to download the app, we could go ahead and create a button. And we can change this height to 56. We can change the width to 300. And we can create our first button. Let's do the dark gray. Let's round the edges so it doesn't feel too overwhelming. And then if we take a look at our typographic scale, maybe we can use 21 and H7 for our button. So you could say something like download, change it to, great, so it should be an H7. Change the fill to white so that there's contrast between this and the button, and making sure that it's centered. And so we have our download button, and then next we can just duplicate that and create our sign in. And so if I were to do this, if I were to just change this to sign in, if we're looking at this page, you may notice that there's not a really big difference between download and sign in. There's not enough contrast. So if I were to land here, I may not know what I want to do, what action I want to take. So in order to create that principle of contrast, we could go in and we could change it so that the fill could be a white. Maybe we'll go ahead and add a stroke outline. So I'm just reducing it to 0.5 because I feel like the line's a little thick. I'm just changing this to a dark gray. And then we need that to come through. So I will also adjust the text color to a dark gray. And we have something that looks like this. So there's a noticeable difference between download and sign in. My eyes are drawn to download, but if I don't need that option and I'm trying to sign in, that is also visible as well. What questions do we have about the principle of contrast here? Or any other questions that come to mind? Okay. And we're not going to be adding any imagery here, but what would also bring that user's attention to this page would be some sort of placeholder image that we can add. So I'm just going to go in and add in a rectangle, and we can just pretend that is a placeholder image for the time being. I'm just going to lighten it up a bit, and I'm just going to round the corners. So when you're creating wireframes, you may have just empty placeholder images. There's a couple of ways that people have added them in. Maybe they'll add an X. Sometimes folks just write placeholder in the corner, but that is really going to be helpful in documentation as you're showing your work to stakeholders, just so they know that you're not coming in and you're just adding a gray rectangle. That has happened in the past where you'll have somebody who does not understand UX design. So that will be your job to teach them what it is all about and to inform them that these are just grayscale wireframes and that these are not actually final mockups. All right, so then moving down the page, we're going to focus on rule of odds. We'll also take a look at playing around with centering. And what we'll do is we'll create a services section. And so we'll also be focusing on text hierarchy. We can see text hierarchy in play with this header. Then we continue to go down and see the subtitle or the body text. And one of the things with Flutter is that we can focus on social features. And what we can do is we can emphasize social features. And maybe this can be for, change this to an H6. Cool. And then what we can do next is highlight what one of those social features could look like. So again, maybe another way to sell this feature, enjoy video chat, games, and stickers. And so right now, we don't really have a big difference between these two. So maybe we can go ahead and make this take a look. We don't want to draw away from what we have here, but we can try an H3. And so a lot of this, as you can see, is just seeing what works. Maybe it could look something like this. Maybe we can make this stand out from this. So just as exploratory, what could it look like if we were to bold this? All right, that's a little bit better. It's a little bit clearer, being able to distinguish these two. There's also a feature where if you were to click on the 3 dots on the bottom right-hand side, you could also change it. And so you could change it to uppercase, lowercase, title case. And so let's see what it looks like if we were to change it to uppercase. All right, so there's a little bit more of a difference. And so let's explore with that. And make sure that things are aligned. And then maybe there is some additional subtext about what this entails. So we could go ahead and just add some additional text on the bottom and center it. And there's something called lorem ipsum if you have not used it before. This is actually placeholder text that you can use in your designs if you don't have copy that's ready. So let me go ahead and share this with you all. But if I don't have anything at the moment, I can copy in lorem ipsum, go into my guided project, and just paste that in as placeholder, similar to this being our placeholder image and this being our placeholder text. And then we can incorporate the rule of odds by adding in images below. So I'm just going to copy, actually let me group this, Command G. I'm going to label this as a placeholder image. I can also go ahead and create a component. So if I were to, once I've grouped this and selected this, what is that shortcut for components? Option, Command K, all right. So if I were to click on this and select Option Command K, you'll see in the layers that this has changed to this purple color, and that this is going to be our, this has now turned into basically a symbol. So with that, it makes it easier to do your work, where if I were to duplicate this and create let's say if I were to use that, you would be able to copy and paste that over without recreating it. If I were to go ahead and change this image, because this is the master component, it would go ahead and change everything else. So this is going to make your workflow process a lot faster. So that is how you can create components in Figma. I'm going to stop there. Any questions on creating a component in Figma? I promise you this is going to make your life so much easier by creating components. So if you haven't done so already in your files for Build Week for your projects, start creating them. Gradually, as you get over to labs, there are going to be iterations that you'll need to make, and it's going to save you so much time. And you can always go back to your assets or to go back and see your components by going into assets, and you should be able to see all of the components that are available. And awesome.
Yeah, I actually had a question, and I feel like one of the really great things about components is that you can edit a component, and then like anywhere that you have that like component saved elsewhere, that it will be updated. But that seems to make it hard to save old versions of things, because you're like updating the component, and so it's hard to like keep a copy of what the old one looked like.
Yes, it is.
How do we do that?
I get really meticulous over things like that. I start saving separate files. So like once I'm done with wireframing, or once I'm done with the iteration, I might save that as a separate file. So that way I can see everything that's there. And that way, if I'm making updates and adding components, it won't impact my older files.
Okay, gotcha.
Can I just add to that a little bit? So if you wanted to keep it on the same file, if you just clicked on the component and right click, you can see there's a detach option. That way it just detaches it from the main component, so any changes will not take effect. So that's just another way you can do it too.
Amazing. Yes.
That is cool, but it's not helpful. I mean, I guess you could do it momentarily. Like, I guess, can you like take one piece, separate? I guess you would have to like make a copy, separate a piece, and put it somewhere.
So my understanding is that you can actually save design versions within one file. You don't have to make multiple files. And then you just name them like design version with blue, design version with orange, within one file of Figma.
That's awesome. Serena, I know we only have 5 minutes left. Let's, if that's possible, because I haven't explored versions yet, but has that helped you solve that issue with creating several different components and not having to update everything at once?
Yeah, so Ash has actually showed me how to do that. Is she available to chime in? Because I know you can go to your history and your versions, and then you can actually save your progress piece by
Oh, Ash, are you talking? I can't hear you.
Is anyone else getting the static?
Yeah.
Sounds terrible.
Okay.
Oh, really? That might be me.
No, it's gone now.
Oh.
Yeah, it was just like whoever started talking, I wasn't on the screen, I was on my Figma board, so whoever started talking, I couldn't hear them, it was just static.
Okay, so what are you trying to show? I mean, what exactly do you need me to show?
We were talking about design versions, so history versions for within Figma.
Well, so my specific question was actually about saving old versions of components.
Old version of components?
Yeah,
So
like if you want to update all of your components with a new design, but you still want to keep the old like appearance for reference, how do you save that?
okay, I can show you if you would like.
Or do you want to, what's easiest, Dash?
I can share my screen and kind of just talk about that if you
Yeah.
would like. Okay, so this is one of my projects for Build Week. It's called Art Portfolio, and basically I created an art board right here, and I put all of my high fidelity components on here, all the master components. So let's say I started in low fidelity, which I did. I would have had a style guide for low fidelity, right? And all of my master components would have been in there. And then I would have had a new version, I guess you could call it, of the higher fidelity. So like you can create different artboards that have like the different, like I guess, versions. So like let's pretend these were all the lower fidelity. I didn't keep lower fidelity ones. Well, maybe like these, but like I didn't keep like the lower fidelity buttons. But like just pretend these were all low fidelity. And I have an artboard specifically that has them all on there. And then I was like, okay, I'm pushing higher fidelity. I'm going to create a whole different style guide, and this will have all the master. So when I go into my wireframing, let's say I wanted to change it to like a different one, I would know, like, I guess you guys don't know what that is. So I'd go to assets, and it would have the different, I guess, things, and I could drag it in or whatever. Does that make sense? Do you know what that? Do you guys? I don't think you guys know what that is, right?
You just make multiple
Or style
versions of a
two.
component, and then you can just drag and drop them in.
Yeah. So like if this was style guide 2 and style guide 1, and I go into wireframes, and then you go to assets, right? It would say this, like if I was like, oh, I want to go and pull something from the higher fidelity one, so it would show me the style guide 1, and I would just pull it or replace it. Like you can replace it in here if you, but it's all like titled. So you would have to, like, that's why you're supposed to title everything so that you know where, like what things are. You know what I mean? Does that make sense?
Sorry, where did you click to get that last screen that you just, like the black with all the list of components?
So this is like over here, it's called instance. So if you click on a component, and if it's an actual component, it's not like the blue thing, you know how like there's blue and purple component. So if it is a component, it'll, like, if you click on it, it'll say instance, and then it'll show all of the components on the other page. So like you have to have all your stuff not on the wireframing page. So you have to make a new page that has all of your master components on that one. Does that make sense?
So you still have to like go in and manually switch everything over, basically.
So like, yeah, if you were in lower fidelity, you could create another page with the lower fidelity style guide that has all your buttons and your filled boxes and everything for the lower fidelity. And then, you know, like you could do it that way, or you could just wireframe and then not do it that way. Like that's the way I did. That's why I didn't have a low fidelity style guide, because I was just creating stuff on this page. I wasn't like, but typically you want to have a style guide set in place first so that all your master stuff is, so that when you're wireframing, you can just pull it from the assets page. So I would be like, oh, I need to put a logo in here, so let's drag this logo in, or whatever.
How are you saving old versions of your designs if you're not saving the old like components?
So I export my boards every time. So that's basically what I do. So like you can save a version history. Saving version histories are recommended because you're going to be working in teams. And for instance, I'm working on wireframing right now, and I realized people were moving a bunch of stuff, and now I have to go and realign everything because there's a lot of people working on one thing, and so saving constantly version histories is going to be good, because let's say people move your wireframes, and then you're going to have to spend a lot of time making sure everything's pixel perfect. So it's just a good habit to save them. And then let's say you want to go and see what was moved or done. You click show version history and it'll show everything, and then it would have like the version that you saved, and then you can click it and then revert back to that one. So it's always good to save version histories. But typically before you guys start wireframing, I recommend just creating a page that has all your master components on one artboard. I tried to label mine like logo, buttons, arrow state, build boxes, and whatnot, and then make sure they're all master components. So they have the diamond that has the 4 little things. This one isn't a master component because it doesn't have the 4 diamonds, but typically you want this page to only have master components, so that when you make a new page just for wireframing, that when you drag things in, see how they're not master, they're just copies of the master. So you go back and you go, I want to change something this to a different color, right? Let's say this color. If I want to change it on the master style guide, now it's changed on every single artboard.
Yeah.
So like you can have multiple artboards that have different versions of your components. So just like you would just push A and then just create another one, and then you can label it like low fidelity or whatever, and then high fidelity or whatever. But you always got to make sure that these are the master components. So that like if you need to make that change, it's done on this page, so that when you go over here, it's implemented on this page. Does that make sense?
Gotcha. All right, cool. This has been helpful.
That is fantastic, Ash. Thank you so much. One thing I'm going to call out with Ash's work is that everything was organized. That's the goal, that all of you will keep your things organized, because it'll make your life so much easier. All right, so I know we went a little bit over, but I think, you know, what Ash shared was definitely really important, and we can talk more about it tomorrow during our sprint Q&A. Just wanted to show the update. So implementing the rule of odds, the placeholder images were added here. So this is our final deliverable. Feel free to come back in here and take a look. And we'll move over to the assignment. So, all right, what we're going to do is you're going to continue working on your Build Week project. Basically, the in-class challenge that we did today, you're going to do the same thing with your afternoon assignment. Your afternoon assignment will need to be completed in Figma. And so when you make these updates, you can just pick one user flow. You do not have to do everything. Start with one user flow, make these adjustments. And with your project submission, being that's in Figma, just make sure that we have access to your file and that we have a link as well. And just making sure that your file should be organized. So that is something that we will be looking for. And if you have extra time, there are 2 stretch goals. One, finding a website and evaluating its visual hierarchy and posting a summary and screenshot of it. And then another stretch goal, if you have not started designing your desktop wireframes of your Build Week project, then start designing it. If not, let's say you've already created a desktop, then start designing one for mobile. Rubric is attached, and so a lot of this is going to be based on some of the visual hierarchy principles that we looked at earlier. So we want to reach for level 3 in terms of contrast and hierarchy, making sure that important elements stand out, that there's consistent spacing and alignment. Again, thinking about proximity, related items close to one another, elements that are not are further spaced. Attention to detail. So since this is going to be a Build Week project, we need to make sure that everything is spelled correctly. If you have some lorem ipsum, that is okay. But if you do have actual copy that you're using, making sure that that is tidied up. And then your file format is organized. And that your submission makes it easy to access. I will pause there. What questions do we have about the assignment or the rubric?
So we are just using one wireframe and just changing it through based on the principles, or?
I would pick out a flow that you have. So it might be several screens, and then make adjustments to those.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Sure. Other questions on the assignment or rubric? If any questions pop into your head, feel free to add them into the UX7 help channel. I did not get a chance to do a daily UI, so I will pull something from the submissions, and then I'll showcase my thoughts on that, the critique. And then for tomorrow, your sprint projects, just as a heads up, have been related to the Kaya wallet app. You will be using that as your sprint project. So make sure that you have things set up for that. So if you need to go in and make some minor adjustments, or if you need to go in and fix your files, that is giving you a heads up as to what to be prepared for. Cool. Any final questions?
Yes, just a really quick one. You know how when you were earlier working on Figma, you pulled up this calculator tool? What was the shortcut for that?
Yeah, so if you are a Mac user, just click on.
It's just.
So in Figma, you can do math in here. So if I were to use like a frame, and let's say I wanted to see the width, if I were to divide by 2,
Yeah.
I'd be able to do that.
No, but the thing that you pulled up, what was that?
This one?
Yeah. Yeah.
That is only available for Mac users.
Oh, is it? Okay.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, what is it called though? I'm just curious.
I don't know what it's actually called. I just hit Command Spacebar and then it appears, but I can go in and like search for things. It's like a shortcut for Mac to find things.
All right, cool. Thank you.
Sure. Anything else that I can answer? Wonderful. Okay, awesome. Thank you for staying on 8 minutes with me. Enjoy your lunch, and I will see you all tomorrow for a sprint Q&A. I will post a Slido, so if you have questions, feel free to add them in there. All right, thanks everyone.